It's time for another NZ Aviation Podcast. Paul Brennan here in the bunker in Auckland, and Martin, what is now a familiar backdrop?
Yeah, still in Roma.
Yeah.
Still in Roma.
It sounds like you're stuck there, like Hotel California. You can never leave.
That's kind of what it's beginning to feel like. Yes, indeed.
How much longer do you think you'll be in the clutches of Roma? It's like that series of the glass dome that no one could go outside. You're in the glass dome of Roma.
I don't think for much longer.
Right.
The owner of the business is having a major battle with the owner of the building, and I think it's just about to be all over, to be honest.
Oh, well, you were actually technically stranded, so it's not as if you decided to go make a life in Roma and it hasn't worked out.
No, and that's unlikely to happen.
Now, what's all this about driving along runways in the middle of nowhere? What's all that about? You can't just go onto a runway and drive up and down a runway, can you?
Well, you can actually. Last week, I took a trip up to Eromanga, which is about another 500-600 kilometers west of here. So you drive up to Charleville, turn left, go to Quilpie, camped in Quilpie for a couple of nights, and then took a day trip out to this place called Eromanga, which is absolutely stunning. It's in the Cooper Basin. You're about 1,000 k's from Brisbane. You're about 1,400 k's from Adelaide. It's the true outback.
Wow.
And Eromanga has an airport. It has a dinosaur museum as well, but it also has an airport. And
you would have felt at home there.
Sorry?
I said you would have felt at home there.
Yeah.
Being a bit of a dinosaur yourself now. We all are now.
The local cafe was run by a guy from Hastings.
Really? Small world?
Yeah. There's about I think it's about 80 to 100 people. It serves as a sort of a little service center for the oil industry. There's a couple of oil fields up there. Mm-hmm. and a lot of the oil industry is serviced out of Adelaide. They drive up from the south, and that's kind of the reason for Eromanga. And they've got a 1,600 meter runway, and it's unsecured. It just says, "Please shut the gate after you enter." And
please shut the gate, mate.
We went into the airport and drove onto the runway. Yeah.
And hooned up and down.
Oh, once. Yeah.
Obviously, no traffic.
There's nothing.
No. Was that there for the industry, to support industry up there, do you think?
I think it's mainly perhaps for that, but I think the Royal Flying Doctor Service comes in.
Right.
And we were there on a Tuesday, and they come in on a Thursday, so we thought we were pretty safe, and we kept a good eye out, and we had a look around, and yeah, it's sealed, 1,600 meters long. Everything's solar powered. All the runway lights are all solar powered, and the nearest fuel's in Quilpie, which is about 120 k's away.
How do they turn the lights on at night if they're solar powered?
Yeah, we were wondering that. Maybe they're controlled by the mics, or they just come on.
Yeah, well, obviously batteries or something powering them.
But we couldn't figure out how they turn them on. There didn't appear to be any radio antenna or anything nearby.
There's something about a deserted runway. I remember when I was out at the Chatham Islands, and I went out to the airport with the Air Chathams people. They were flying off to Pitt Island in a Cessna to pick up some, I don't know, crayfish or some high-end seafood, and I was left there alone for about 40 minutes, and I just walked up and down the runway, no one around for kilometers and kilometers, and it's quite it's an interesting thing to be out on a big long runway with no one around.
Yeah, it's pretty cool actually.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, so let's get into some business here. We're going to talk about our local airlines, Air New Zealand, Qantas, Virgin, Pacific, etc. But one thing's interesting of note on the day we're recording this, which is Saturday, the 6th of June, the Chinese are warning their citizens now that if you travel to Australia, you could encounter racist abuse. There seems to be some sort of campaign going to persuade, how much persuasion is required, I don't know, the Chinese traveller to start ignoring the likes of Australia. Has there been any comment on that in your media today?
Oh, they're not happy. Yeah, there has. Yes, they're not happy at all. But that China's done this before. They did it in New Zealand, I believe, about 3 or 4 years ago. They were advising Chinese nationals not to go
But
to New
this is
Zealand.
specifically related to the pandemic and people's responses. Have there been racial or hate attacks? Those classic sort of shot on the train rants, anything like that towards Chinese or Asian people, I guess more than normal in the wake of this pandemic? Because they might have a point, I don't know.
I'd say that probably no more than usual.
Right.
Unfortunately, I'm not saying there should be more, but these things are unfortunate. They do happen. I don't think there's any more of them happening than usual.
Well, anyway, it seems that they're showing the instruments of torture, and that is withholding a tourism business potentially to, well, I guess the power politicians in Australia. Like, watch out.
Well, it's a standard diplomatic response to China, isn't it? Every time they're not happy with a client state that's not towing a line, they'll
client
say,
state.
Stop our tourists coming to see you. So,
client being the operative word.
Well, and the Chinese government actually said it. They said we considered Australia and New Zealand to be client states. That official then had to back down, having said that, but that was out there. They consider Australia, New Zealand, and a few other countries to be client states.
It seems that the COVID response has sort of petered out here. The line was last weekend when there was a large protest in, I think, the main centres of New Zealand. Quite a few thousand people came out, totally ignored social distancing, seemed to forget about the whole thing instantaneously. And of course, our government and police are very reluctant to hold anyone to account there. They've been stopping people having funerals and breaking up family gatherings in backyards, but this seemed to be okay. The organisers weren't singled out. I guess you could make an argument that those people protesting are probably potential voters for the current Labour Party. So maybe you don't want en masse to upset them, but it just shows you, I guess the point is how easily this whole adherence and totally buying the program can be just thrown out the window in one afternoon.
Yeah,
one afternoon, man.
Yeah, what we also found quite funny is when we headed up, me and my mate, we headed up out west. That was the day they'd announced that the 500-kilometer travel restriction for people living in the outback had been lifted, and the whole state could suddenly travel anywhere where they wanted to, which is also very interesting because the politics of it has been as if you've got the two Labour-led states, Victoria and Queensland, and they've been basically going whatever the federal government has been saying, which is liberal, whatever the Liberal government's been saying, these two Labour states have been holding out and saying, no, we're not going to do that. You're putting our populations in danger, and my job as the premier of this state is to keep everybody safe and everything. And a number of people have been saying, you wait, quick as a flash, the moment the polls turn, they'll open up the state. And that's exactly what happened. The Labour government in Queensland started polling a little bit worse, and booyah, they pulled the opening date 2 weeks ahead, and it was all on. And what was interesting is out in the far outback where we were, we stopped at a roadhouse and bought a Coke, and the people there said we were the second outsiders they'd seen in 3 months.
Really?
And they were
3 months.
They were petrified. They had not seen any outsiders in 3 months, and they were like really worried. What are we doing there? Why were we in there? And I said, well, we're from Roma, so we were allowed to travel 500 k's for the last 2 weeks, so we're all good. And, I don't know, we're really worried about it here. And every shop we went into, we had to sign a register and all this type of thing. They were really, really paranoid about it out there.
Which means they have been sold very well.
Well, yeah, it does. Yes, they seem to think that the cities were devastated and that it was, yeah, they certainly had a more pessimistic view of what had happened than reality. Yeah.
Mm. It's interesting how it sort of breaks down where the division lines are between those who really buy the official line. Those who are totally skeptical, some are in the middle. It's kind of all over the place. I guess a bit of time we'll be able to see 2020 if people were overreacting or doing whatever. We're going to get back to China because you see that they've bought a stake in the Norwegian Airlines operation that's been struggling. So they've obviously gone and picked up a bit of a bargain there because they were on their knees.
I've read a bit about that. I don't think they actually necessarily bought a stake. They've ended up with a stake because of the way they reissued shares and apportioned them to current shareholders. So
right.
The company that's up with a stake is called Boc Aviation, which is a leasing company which is controlled by the Bank of China.
Well, yeah, that's right. It's owned by Chinese government, yeah.
Yeah, Chinese government. So they own 12.6% of Norwegian now. But there's an Irish leasing company, AerCap. They own nearly 16% now, and I'm not sure anybody wants to own any of it.
So these are the companies that have leased aircraft to Norwegian and basically either are faced with a decision of pulling their aircraft out, letting the airline go bust. No other airlines to feed those aircraft to, so you might as well keep them flying, and you come in as a shareholder to back that. I wonder how long that can go on for.
Oh, that remains to be seen. I think they're kind of thinking, well, we've got a share in the company, however worthless it is. At least if they fly the planes and they can fill them up with people, we might get paid something. So I guess that's the track they're going down.
Yeah, and it looked like also read China that Trump was going to stop the Chinese airlines again, but he's now decided he will let Chinese airlines operate a limited number of flights to the US, backing down from a threat to ban the flights,
yes.
Says the Associated Press.
Election time's coming up, and he does appear to be thrashing around, trying to find something.
Yeah.
And so every decision the government's taking at the moment will be very, very closely tracking whatever the polls are saying.
4 Chinese airlines currently fly between the US and China. That wouldn't have been the case pre-COVID, though.
I don't know. I mean,
because there are quite a few airlines, aren't there?
Yeah, but I've never really thought of how many Chinese airlines fly to America. But yeah, maybe there weren't many more than 4.
I remember seeing China Eastern A340s at LA, and I think they even had MD-11s for a while, way back. I think they're still operating there. It'd be Air China, and China Southern would be one of them, probably.
Yeah, and I don't know whether Cathay counts as a Chinese airline.
It may do.
Yeah.
And United Airlines, Delta Airlines, American Airlines suspended competing flights earlier this year as demand plummeted. Obviously, there's not going to be any demand, probably going from the US back to China for a while.
Yeah.
Anyway, closer to home. Oh, no, you got more to say?
No.
Closer to home, in no particular order. Air New Zealand signals its 777-200ER fleet may never fly again. I think they own 3 or 4 and lease 3. So I guess there's no resale value there at all, is there? I mean,
nothing.
They're done.
Freighters maybe,
but even then,
no.
Yeah, because it can't lift the same as those purpose-built freighters, which have the different wing and GE90s, not rollers, right?
Right. No, they're essentially with it. So Air New Zealand's going to have its local fleet, which is going to be Airbus based. They're going to have 787s and a couple of 777-300ERs at the top, and that's going to be them, eh?
Yeah. They said to the NZX on Tuesday, Air New Zealand said it expected to book a non-cash impairment charge in relation to some 777 aircraft in the range of $350 million to $450 million in the 2020 financial year. That's a lot.
It is.
Average age of the 300 ERs is now 8 years.
Well, they're getting up there.
Yeah, so they're getting up there a bit. So that one is hitting, and I see that one of the Qantas 400 ERs has arrived at Mojave. They're not going to be seen again. It's a bit of a sad end for the 747 in Australian Qantas service, because it's been just such a constant, and then just to sort of like fizzle out and not have its ceremonial due. I don't know about that.
The flies are out again. It's warmed up a bit and you get the flies.
Yeah, I see that. The Aussie salute, right?
Yeah. It is a bit ignominious, I guess. For
that's a good word.
It was the backbone of their airline for years, but good thing Aussies, they've got 2 on display, which is nice.
Yeah, good on them for that.
Yeah.
Apparently, the only remaining Air New Zealand 74 passenger jet, used to be NBV, has been flying out of Heathrow the last week, doing repatriation flights for immigrant groups to various parts of the world. A couple of weeks ago, also, it was operating to the Philippines, doing repatriation for WAMOS, charter. So that's still active, that aircraft, I've been told. So they're wanting Air New Zealand need to save, they said they're burning through $5 million a day. They need to save another $150 million off the wage bill. And they have suffered, here's the turnover's gone down from 5.8 billion last financial year to 500 million. My golly. That's a 90% contraction.
Yeah. Well, it's not just the airlines that are being affected. I have some ex-colleagues that work for baggage handling companies that make baggage handling systems, right? And these are these are huge contracts that they have, and they reckon their business is down 80% this year, and they think it'll take 2 to 3 years to recover because the airports have cancelled all their new investment in baggage handling systems, and even the ones that have just bought baggage handling systems, they're negotiating down their service agreements for the next year because they say, well, we haven't had any service for the last 2 months, so we're not paying you for it. And that's often hundreds of thousands a quarter.
Wow, that has a knock-on effect, doesn't it? Big time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, Jetstar are talking about starting up domestic flying in New Zealand again in early July. Air New Zealand are adding services. They're putting their Invercargill Auckland A320 back in operation. I think they've been told by the government, probably New Zealand first more than anything, come on, you've got to get those towns connected again, even if it doesn't make you money. Maybe that's what that 900 million line of cash is for, so they can just... Because the planes are half full on distancing, aren't they?
Yeah, which is crazy.
You can't make money.
No, but it does seem that when you read the press reports coming out of New Zealand in regard to Air New Zealand, there's a lot of doom and gloom compared to what you read with other airlines in other countries. And I just can't help but think that the new CEO, or the CEO, he's not new now, is using this as, and wisely using this as an opportunity to rejig the entire airline. And what will emerge from this will be quite different from what went into it, because I think the catering to the Herne Bay set, which is a term you came up with, or I heard from you. I don't think it's been an effective strategy for New Zealand, and it's going to be very difficult to do that type of sort of upmarket niche fancy airline that charges a bit more but seems to go over and above on service. Doesn't really, but seems to. It's going to be very hard to do that on 787s, because fundamentally a 787 at 9 abreast in the back is not a good place to be. And it's fine if it's cheap, absolutely, don't get me wrong, no complaints there, but I'm not going to pay $500 more than a competing airline to be crammed into the back of a 787-900.
Right. So what you're saying is they're having to lose that, that sort of that corporate-y. How would you? I mean, if you can think of any other industry, what would it be equivalent to? Sort of interior design shops.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like, an Audi VW. You can go and get an Audi or a VW. They're both essentially exactly the same car. One costs 10 grand more. You're not getting any more for it. It's just a little bit fancy. And I think Air New Zealand, I mean, the last guy, wasn't he from the banking industry?
No, I think Luxon was from the Unilever's soap and personal hygiene products.
Was the guy before that was from the banking industry?
Rob Fife. I think he had a banking background, yeah.
And you kind of got the impression at that stage that they were sort of turning it into like a, when the banks all rebranded in the last 10 years ago, they got all sort of, I don't know, techno fancy minimalist.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I know what you mean.
They were kind of doing up the aircraft like that. And I think Air New Zealand lost a lot of its charm through that thing. They were obviously trying to appeal to the stopover people in Los Angeles who got on and then flew to London.
Yeah.
They were overselling the New Zealand myth, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it was personally a bit for the nation's sake anyway, a bit of a mistake to pull out of London.
Oh, I think
they could have found a way to do that.
Yeah. Well, maybe due to their fleet rationalization and that they've decided they just can't do it. And yeah, they probably weren't making money on it because they were too expensive. Because I know almost nobody who's come from Europe to New Zealand in recent times that has flown with Air New Zealand. They've all flown with Emirates, Qantas, Chinese Airlines, Air Singapore, you name it. And you ask, well, why didn't you fly Air New Zealand? Because I'd still say it's pretty nice flying Air New Zealand. And they said, it's just too expensive. We went, we save up. We know what we're going to be. We're going to be sitting in a 17.5-inch wide seat in the back of a tube. It makes no difference.
Being slung ridiculous video content that you possibly feel embarrassed watching.
And the crew from London to Los Angeles, the cabin crew wasn't even Kiwi.
They were British. Yeah, interesting. So it'll be fascinating to see if a guy who's come from, it may be more of a background than retail. I haven't looked into too much of Greg Foran's background, but he came from Walmart. Apparently, from what I've read, he spent time on the floor at Walmart, doing serving and sort of helping people as a in-store person. So he obviously likes to get the pulse of a place. Maybe you'd think that he would have been, though he's been hit by something he probably didn't expect it, but may have been in the process of trying to work out those things and get a grip on the organization and filtered through a retail brain, work out how best to, position the business going forward away from that we were talking about before, which it would have been interesting to see where they were heading if this thing didn't happen.
Yeah. See
how long would it?
Yeah.
Because as long as property prices go up, that set that let's say that they like to appeal to, they're probably not spending money. So it requires that whole system to be operating probably for people to spend like the $600 or $700 above the competition.
Yeah.
And you got to remember also, there's a very I don't want to sound I'm not jealous or anything, but the type who take advantage of all the hospitality arrangements that go with a certain class of passenger, they also end up ramping up the cost for everyone, because those lounges aren't cheap.
No.
Imagine how much food those places go through in a day.
Well, yeah, you'd be surprised how much red wine they go through in a day when I get into them.
Well, there you go. The average idiot in the back, 9 abreast in the back of the 787, is paying for that essentially.
Yeah, the trouble is you need a lot of red wine to put up with being 9 abreast in the back of a 787.
No, I mean before you get on the plane, mate. I mean, you got to be seen at these places and and everything's free, so you tend to want to pig out. I don't know, I don't go into them, but that's what I do.
Yeah. No, I've been quite lucky. I've always had enough points I managed to sustain lounge access for a long time. But when I was flying around Europe last year, I wasn't flying Star Alliance, so I didn't have lounge access. And, it cost me $3 for a coffee. It made no difference. It just made no difference. Yeah,
well, there you go. In the end, it doesn't really, unless you've got an ego to feed. Anyway, obviously Aussies are positive about Qantas because their share price has risen. Rallied strongly this week as equity markets trend bullishly, and with the company on Thursday announcing that it would significantly increase its domestic and regional flying capacity between June and July. So I guess that's a bit of positivity reflected in the share market there.
Well,
but that's just not even getting back to normal.
they're anticipating the rebound, and so there will be a bit of confidence around that. And the government's doing a lot here, although they very grandiosely announced that they're giving people a $125,000 grant towards a new home build or a significant renovation on an existing home. But as usual with these things, it's fallen a bit flat, because yes, you can get 125. No, sorry, not 125, 25. You can get 25.
Yeah, that sounded pretty generous.
Yeah, you can get $25,000 towards a home renovation, right? You think, oh, that's pretty, but only if you borrow 150.
Oh, okay.
So it's less about giving the homeowners some money,
getting you more into debt.
It's more about getting you more into debt and getting the banks more cash.
Because they need it right now, probably.
And that's fallen flat. A lot of people have said, "No, sod that. We're not going to borrow 150 so we can get 25." It's in the same year and before this all started.
So that's the government in concert with the banks.
Well, they're one and the same, essentially, aren't they?
Well, it seems to be these days. They've got a lot of power. What's Alan Joyce saying? He said, we know there is a lot of pent-up demand for air travel. We are already seeing a big increase in customers booking and planning flights in the weeks and months ahead. So I guess that's a dead cat bounce, isn't it? I mean, if coming off zero activity, any bounce back is going to be that sort of bounce.
Yes, it's going to be. Yes, it's a positive thing. So let's invest in it. It's all good. But it's better than nothing. So let's be happy about it.
Better than nothing. Yeah, well, that's positive. Virgin Australia down to two bidders now. I guess capital companies, Bain Capital and Cirrus Capital Partners. I think Cirrus Capital Partners have investments in leasing or something as well. But Bain Capital, I think, has also owned a few airlines in its time.
They're quite close to Virgin, I believe, Cirrus Capital Partners.
Oh, okay. So they're talking about doing at least 70% of their current flying in the relaunch.
The Queensland government's obsessed with that they'll keep their headquarters in Brisbane and all of this. For God's sake, Yeah, that's going to be interesting. I don't think anybody's going to get what they want out of that except the people who put the money in. They will probably know why they're doing it, and it won't necessarily be why everyone else thinks they're doing it.
Well, the company's administrators, just reading here, they say that we're in a strong place when it comes to delivering the best possible commercial outcome for all creditors, and to see a strong and sustainable Virgin Australia emerge from the process. And in a response to this progress, UBS analysts noted that, in our view, the LCC, low-cost carrier only offering, or an outcome where the new carrier doesn't materially change things, would both be positive for Qantas.
Yes. I think if it was, I've been thinking about this a little bit. I think if Virgin was clever, they'd buy Rex, right? They'd expand Rex to do all the little towns out in the middle of nowhere and become a full-service low-cost carrier. And Virgin would retire to the main trunk routes and the overseas thing, and that's how they split it up. What they call the whole thing, who knows? But I think that would put them in a good space against Qantas. And the Rex, whatever that becomes, wouldn't be a low-cost carrier. Maybe low-cost carrier has negative connotations at the moment. Call it a true value carrier, and the Virgin brand, if they want to, can carry on doing Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Hong Kong, Johannesburg, that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, Rex's strength, again, is all its provincial connections. So even if you're just bringing those little connections through to the main cities,
yes,
that's still working your audience, working your customer base.
Exactly. And yes, I think that would make, whether or not the Competition Commission allows them to buy Rex, I don't know, but that's what I would be saying. I'm going to resurrect Virgin by buying Rex, taking over their whole network, making them the true value airline, and having a full service airline to do the international, to take the fight to Qantas on the routes where Qantas can be hurt the most. If everything's a competition, now that's a whole other thing. Do you always have to compete?
Well, yeah. You wonder what is the driver here? Just to have the appearance of two competing airlines, even though there's no room for that well, I think we've agreed, and the market set it for that type of airline. There cannot be two.
Yes, yes, and I think the good thing with them taking over Rex is with the people in the backcountry, they're quite used to flying in turboprops and everything, so they could probably compete against Qantas, even if Qantas tried to steal some of their rights by putting small jets on it. Because if you're doing those milk runs, I think it's a pretty good dollar. Those planes are cheap to run. They seem pretty busy, and people. I mean, the people when you speak to people out here, they love Rex.
Yeah, I mean, and they've standardized on the Saab, right?
Yeah,
so
Saab 340.
Yeah. So they'll have it as lean as you could ever want if you're operating one large fleet of one type. Plenty of parts too, I would imagine. Still for those things. Think of all those American Eagle ones that were dealt to.
We'll see where it goes. I mean, aren't a lot of the A340s out here? Aren't they from that? What was it called? Origin Pacific.
Oh, the Jetstreams or?
No, I thought they had. Didn't they have some Saabs?
No, they didn't. No, Air Nelson had Saabs. The guy who ended up launching Origin used to have them in Air Nelson.
Okay.
Yeah, and they were based at Nelson. That's where that maintenance base started out.
Yeah.
Metroliners and Saab 340s there. Anyway, on to Boeing, and they say they're resuming manufacturing of the 737 MAX after nearly a 5-month hiatus. They're going to start at a low rate as it implements more than a dozen initiatives focused on enhancing workplace safety and product quality. Because I think there were some issues with build quality also that came up, didn't they, when
lots
they started looking at these things closely?
Dodgy wiring, sharp edges not filed off, holes not deburred. No, there were a lot of issues.
Yeah, so they must be sensing that they're getting closer to getting certification. They must be.
They must be, but God, it's taken a long time, hasn't it? Much longer than
I thought. I think that's more for the FAA to redeem itself.
See, the FAA though has confirmed that they are still quite happy with Boeing carrying out a lot of self-certification. They're just going to have more oversight over the final approval process. So they haven't really made any huge changes unless the reporting's not correct, which is quite possible. But yeah, they seem to have said, no, we're quite happy, largely quite happy with the way things have been done, and we're going to stick with it. On the other hand, they probably don't have the manpower to go back to the way it probably should have been. But anyway, which raises an interesting point with that idea Boeing are floating around at the moment, which is that 767X, which by all accounts, from what I can read about it, is a 767-400.
Right.
With taller landing gear and new engines on it. And no other structural changes, or as few structural changes as they can get away with. So not much in the way of aerodynamics, because the freighters already have a new cockpit, which is similar to the 737 MAX and the 787.
Oh, okay.
Cockpit, yeah. They don't think they need to do anything except put a larger engines and a taller landing gear. And yet that's exactly what they thought with the 737 MAX, and look where that got them. So, they're going to put bigger engines on it. They're going to be heavier. They're probably going to be mounted further forward. Where does that end up?
And it's another, following the same concept as with the 737, is trying to, make these, the production life of these models like decades and decades, and not coming up with the new ideas. I mean, you look at Airbus, they came up with the 350. They didn't just sort of enhance the A3, even enhance the A330 again with the Neo, but they went for the whole shebang. Boeing don't do that.
Well, they tried to just enhance the A330 though, didn't they? And nobody bit. So they went with the A350, which has turned out to be a very good idea. They then found out they could squeeze a whole lot more out of the A330, and that's turned out to be a relatively good idea. Now Boeing's painted themselves into a corner with the 737 MAX, where they probably have realized internally that they've got to get rid of the 737 name and brand. They do need to enhance their offering at the lower end of the wide body. So they think, well, let's chuck some new engines on a 767, see how she goes. We'll sell a few to the American airlines. And then we can use the money we would have spent on developing a new middle-of-the-market aircraft to develop a new 737 replacement, which will probably start at the 800 size and work its way up to bigger than the A321, filling in the sort of the bottom 2/3 of the market, which raises the question: what are they going to do now that the Embraer thing's off? What are they going to do to fill the very bottom of the market, which would be the Embraer, 170, 175, 190, and Max 7? And some people are saying, well, they just won't go into that part of the market. They just say, well, we can't afford it at the moment. Maybe in 10 years we'll develop another plane, a smaller plane, but at the moment we just can't do it. And maybe that's the wise thing to do, because what's the point in developing a current technology plane in the smaller part of the market when maybe in 10, 15 years there's a whole lot of new technology out there? I don't know, hybrid, different materials, a large turboprop, maybe something like that. So
electric.
They'll cede that market to Airbus. Airbus will kill it with the A220, the A220 100, 300, and possibly the 500. The Airbus will probably fill up everything up to a sort of 200-seater stretched A321 and A322 with a new wing. And Boeing will have to get back to the drawing board, something they should have done earlier.
You could stretch that A320 airframe, couldn't you? Like the A322 we talk about. You could stretch that in theory to the length of like one of those DC-8 62s.
You
could, couldn't you?
Much longer than a 62 probably was no longer than a 757, right? I don't know.
Oh, they were bloody long, maybe a little longer, but you can imagine it being that long. They've done it before. Couple more items on the 732. The TUI airline have agreed a compensation package with Boeing for the 737 MAX, which basically wonder how many of these things are going to be agreed upon, and how much is Boeing going to have to put aside for, well, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of airframes not in airline service. I mean, it must be a huge bill.
Yeah, it will be a huge bill, but they'll negotiate something. They'll get something for nothing out of it.
Well, they'll discount them, won't they?
Yeah.
They'll discount them ridiculously, and that'll be the payoff. Or even give a few away, maybe. There's also a bit of a battle going on between that Russian cargo carrier, Volga. You always say the second part of that beautifully.
Dnieper.
Yeah, they have a fleet of I think AN 124s and IL 76s, but also quite a big 747 freighter fleet, Dash 8s. They were going to take 2, and I think the production line's basically petering out. We can talk about that. Couldn't raise the money. Boeing's obviously promised them to someone else. Say what? They've got the money now. They want them. Boeing's saying, no. The anticipated unnamed customer is UPS. And but if you're Boeing and you know that UPS, they want what could be the last 2 or 3 or whatever 747 freighters made, and you know that you can sell them in the future a whole bunch of 777 freighters, way more than the Russians, you'd probably go with them, wouldn't you?
Yes, and especially if it looks like you might be shutting down the 747-800 line anyway, which is the other rumor, sort of thing. Is it a rumor? I don't know. It's been semi-announced that Boeing are considering shutting down the entire line. So you might as well just get rid of whatever you've got as quickly as possible. And if there's an American customer that's been a steady and loyal customer for many, many years, you'd give it to them.
Wow. So I would have thought that for the freighter anyway, there would have been like into the future going forward, as they say, demand, because, you don't run out of the need for that sort of capacity. And those 747-400 freighters now are getting tired, so at some point they're not going to be, though I wonder if you've got 300 ER freighter conversions, you're probably up there with close to 747-400 load anyway, aren't you?
Well, and that's kind of the stories I've been reading are that Boeing, first of all, it's going to be very expensive to restart production on the 747-8s, particularly for the forward fuselage sections, which have been stopped due to the the factory shutdowns and everything. So they're saying that's going to be expensive to restart. But I think the real background to this is, if they want to, they desperately need sales for the 777X, because there's been cancellations, there's going to be delays, there's going to be deferrals. If they can get a 777X freighter out quickly, it'll finance that newer generation of aircraft, and they'll get a hell of a amount of resources back from trickling out. Let's face it, no matter how well it's selling relatively, they're not selling many 747-8s. They'd be much better off selling 777X freighters.
I wonder if some of the A380 frames that are retired, if they aren't pulled to pieces straight off, that they could end up being, a 747 freighter replacement in the absence of an aircraft, because I imagine the A380 can still lift more than the 777X, right?
Oh, the A380 can lift, I think it's 150 tons, so it can lift, and I think without any work, it's still 130 odd.
I mean, hell, that's pretty good. The
trouble is the upper floor is not in a very good position to put containers up top, and the upper floor is not really strengthened.
Okay.
The lower floor would need to be strengthened, and the underfloor cargo hold's actually relatively small due to the wing box and the way they've got 4 undercarriage bays. It takes up a lot of room. But there is already work afoot to convert them into package freighters.
Yeah, because originally they were offered as a freighter option. So obviously Airbus has done all the engineering and everything on it. They know exactly what to do.
The work can be done. And while we've been talking, I've been looking up the relative lengths of the aircraft, and the longest, the DC-9-63 was 187 feet long.
The DC-8-63.
Sorry, the DC-8-63.
How long? 190 what?
187 feet.
Well, that's pretty good.
The 757-300, right, was only 10 feet shorter.
Right. And that looks long.
And the A321 is 146 feet. So it's
nearly 50 feet shorter.
Yeah, but it's still pretty long for what you consider to be a small aircraft.
True. That DC-8 though would on the wheels would be about the same height as an A320.
Oh yeah, they yeah, and I mean there was recently a picture out there of one of those it was a 72, still flying. Oh, it looks fantastic, doesn't it?
They must have had a few tail scrapes in their time, especially with the older engines on there, in hot conditions, and
But they look great. I always thought the A340-600 looked kind of similar. It had it had the proportions. The engines looked too big. And the A340-600 is 247 feet long, so that's a lot longer.
Wow, yeah, that's huge. Yeah, so I wonder if that Airbus A322 could get up to that length. And you mentioned the A220, and the first one out of the US has just out of Alabama, isn't it?
Out of Alabama.
It's just flown, and that. And what now? Remind us, why has Boeing pulled out of that Embraer thing?
Oh, I guess they don't have the money.
Because I would have thought that was the only way you could compete with that Airbus Bombardier product that Airbus took over.
But they probably just didn't have enough money to plow into development, and they'd rather keep their money at home and put it into fixing the MAX problem. So that A220. That's actually done quite well. So, they started off with the 100 model, and that was a sort of 100 to 120 seater. And they've sold, there's 94 of those ordered and 40 or so are flying. Then they switched up to the 300 model, which is 120 to 150 seater. There's 548 of those things on order.
Wow.
75 of them are flying, and they've just done a modification, because typical that they keep upping the maximum takeoff weight and everything. That can now fly 4,000 nautical miles, which is quite a long way. And now Air France is looking at consolidating their fleet, and they've been using the modeling for an A220-500, which will use the same wing as the 300. So it'll have less range than the 300, maybe 3,500 nautical miles. And that'll take 150 to 180 people. So that's going to chop out the MAX 7 well, actually, the 300 competes with the MAX 7 and the A318, and the 500, should it come about, competes with the MAX 8 and the A320 on routes
Wow.
that need slightly fewer people.
Yeah.
So,
Burning a lot less.
For a lot less fuel, apparently, and the customer experience, people say it's really nice to fly because it's got the 3 and the 2.
Yeah.
But the whole plane feels less crowded. It's got giant windows and is very quiet.
Wow. Yeah, and to see it now being produced in the US and in Delta colors, that must make Boeing not feel too good.
Not too happy.
But their stock has risen 11%, Boeing. So again, optimism, dead cat bounce optimism, right? Is that what that is?
Yeah, well, it's optimism, possibly.
Or just because normality beckons, that's all.
Yes. It's actually, things are going back to the way they were before, and even if that wasn't great, it's still better than what we got now, apparently.
Yeah. And they got quite good job figures released this weekend, though, in the US. More jobs were created than the pessimistic forecasts suggested.
Well, but they've still got 30 million unemployed or something.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that pandemic. That's right. Yeah, forgot about that.
Yeah.
All right. So that's some of the news around. Oh, the defence minister flew around in a Herc above Auckland on Friday, strapped in to with the safety lines on, walking around the back big door, which was down. You could see the Auckland Harbour off in the background. And they did that to draw everybody's attention to the imminent purchase of what they're calling the Super Hercules, I guess the J model, extended J model, which is not really a new aircraft. It's been around for about 30 years now, that version.
Yes,
obviously, we're sticking with what we know, and that's fair enough. I would have liked the Airbus A400, but I guess, we've got to save that's expensive. We've got to save the money, and we've got to look after the US. So 4 on the way. First one delivered in, I think, 2024, $1.16 billion spend.
Jeez, a lot of money, eh?
Well, you got to have them.
Yeah. It's been around for 21 years. First introduced in 1999.
Okay. I've had a look over one at the Avalon Air Show. Actually, it was a UK RAF one. Lots of electronics in it, but I think our ones had the upgrade to some bespoke EFIS cockpit, the old 60s Hercs.
Okay. Yeah.
And
hasn't Air New Zealand, not Air New Zealand, hasn't the New Zealand Navy or Air Force also ordered those Poseidons?
Yeah, P8 Poseidons.
Yeah.
So we're going to have renewed aircraft. And boy, did we get a service life out of the Orions and the Hercs. My God, be 60 years by the time it's wound up. And, it's not often that you would operate a Lockheed product for that long, unless you're a military operator, of course.
Yeah. No, I'm sure they'll be very happy with them.
I think we should try and get some C5s.
Oh, yeah, they're awesome, eh?
That would lift stuff around or get some C-17s or something. I thought that's why I wanted the A400. I thought that would be because it's more capacity, isn't it, than even the Super Herc?
Yeah. The A400's getting close to the C-17.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, you stay with what you know. Though, if you're, I suppose those pilots, current pilots, are in the EFIS environment anyway because of those upgraded avionics and everything. I don't think any of the Orions have their original wings on anymore.
Okay, all got replaced.
They all got replaced, yeah. So anyway, that'll be interesting to see those new aircraft arrive.
It will be.
Yeah, some people won't be happy with it. I think the Greens described them as unnecessary.
Okay.
How you move things around otherwise, I don't know, but there you go. I see this week in aviation history, looking back into the archives, 5th of June, so yesterday, going on 2020 dates yesterday, the AN-225 first flew with the, what was it, the Buran shuttle?
Yeah.
And what
There
a
was a
picture! What a picture!
yeah, pretty cool. And yeah, and then they flew the Buran around on the back of the Miria a few times. They shot the Buran into space where it did a couple of orbits and landed completely automatically with nobody on board. And then they basically scrapped it. I think there's another one half built somewhere, and they just gave up. They said, "Cheers, we're done."
They were able to fly it. It had jet engines in it.
Yes, they did do
Wasn't a glider.
Yeah, the one of their aerodynamic test vehicles had engines on it. Yeah.
No, I think the production had engines on it. I don't think it was there to actually fly it, but it was there to control the descent rate a hell of a lot better.
To bring it in like a brick. You see, old Elon Musk's SpaceX got 2 astronauts into space.
Oh, wow. Didn't that look absolutely stunning? And I see people have even been commenting on the fashion quality of the spacesuits.
Yeah, and then 4 days later, he launched another 60 Starlink satellites, and
yeah,
and that
night launch
came back and landed for the 5th time.
Yeah, that's it's an undeniable program, and now he's with NASA. Basically, his sheer will has saved NASA's ass.
Well, sort of, hey. Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah, he's somehow he's gone ahead and done it, and he's done. When you look at the history of that Falcon 9 rocket, how it's every year it's improved, and you know the when they did I think it was the first Falcon 9 rocket they attempted to launch, and this was part of the NASA test program. They started getting a weak signal from some of the electronics in the second stage because it had rained, and they presumed water had got into the fairing, and so they rotated the rocket down to the horizontal position, opened up the cover, and the chief engineer, after a discussion with Elon Musk and some of his engineers, got in there with a hair dryer. He got in there with a heat gun and dried off the electronics. Should we replace them? Shouldn't. Normally NASA and Boeing and all that, they would replace the whole rocket, right? But he got in there with a heat gun, reckon she's good enough, put the cover back on, silicon up around it, and they launched the next day. Although the signal wasn't perfect, they reckon the signal was good enough, and off it went. And it was a successful launch. And then when they did the first capsule test launch, so they're going to send the capsule up, send it around the Earth a few times, and then bring it back in, they discovered that when they'd done the static test fire, they'd been asked, as part of a test they were doing for NASA, to inject some nitrogen for some reason into the rocket plume for some reason. Anyway, what that had done is in the vacuum engine in the second stage. It's got a really big bell. It's the same engine as the atmospheric engines, but it's just got a much bigger bell in it to operate better in a vacuum. And it had developed a crack. And so what to do? What do we do? Do we replace the nozzle, which is they can't do. They can't make the launch if they replace the nozzle. Can they repair the nozzle? Or can they take tin snips to the nozzle, literally, apparently shear snips, and cut the bottom 6 inches of the nozzle off?
That's a smart move.
And they did the sums and everything. They worked out, well, it would reduce the specific impulse of the rocket engine somewhat, but it wouldn't impede it that much.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a discussion with NASA, and NASA really initially wasn't keen on the idea, but they spent all night proving to them. And then old mate got up there with a cutter and cut the bottom 6 inches off, and off she went and launched, and no problem. Yeah,
well, it's that sort of thinking that gets you places. You reminded me in Joe Sutter's book on the 747. They had a late in the actual production process, they realized the wing needed more twist. Otherwise, it would be, I think, pretty high fuel burn right at the top Mach numbers, the way it was shaped. And, of course, all the engineering teams were competing with each other. And the engineering team on the 7107, the Mach 3 airliner, supersonic airliner, had been stood down because the funding had stopped. So they were circling like sharks and thought they had Joe Sutter on this point because it would require a whole redesign of the wing to give it the twist. And also the wingspan would have to be more, apparently, which would have problems fitting into the box at airports. So Sutter thought about it, and he asked a couple of his bright young engineers to think about the problem overnight. And they came back in the morning and said, if we just twist the outer part of the wing from the outer pylon to the tip will do the same thing. So it required no change in anything. It just a redesign of just that little part of the wing, and that fixed the problem.
Redesign of the internal rigging, probably, yeah.
And it was done in days, and you're like, moving on, next, please.
Yeah.
Whereas, the other teams were trying to get the whole wing redo it, and get all the glory. Anyway, so that's why I think Musk is successful, because he's has that mindset. And you see what the speech Trump made at NASA with the launch. He was there for the launch, basically on the moon, man on the moon, 2022, and back in 24. And I think I'm getting a bit hazy here because I can't. I mean, the whole thing was about an hour long, but I think he said 2028 to start building a base on the moon, and from the base on the moon off to Mars by 2034. Not bad.
Well, we'll see.
Well, I reckon with that Musk, the way Elon Musk has gone and the way that capsule, it really did look like something out of a Stanley Kubrick movie, the way it approached it even had that look. It had a look, like I say, about the spacesuits, but even the spaceship had a look of what you'd expect it to be,
Yes.
He does seem to play to the style thing.
He does, and also interesting that capsule docking was, apart from some manual maneuvering to check the manual maneuvering system, it was completely automatic.
Wow.
And they interviewed the pilot, the capsule pilot, or the guy that sat in the capsule while it docked, and he said the rocket ride up was surprisingly rough. He said it was pretty bumpy, quite dynamic. That's how he said. He said it was a pretty dynamic ride. But he said when they actually docked with the station, he said you couldn't feel it.
Yeah, they've got that soft docking thing. I see in the commentaries. It says, okay, soft docking. You can see it's sort of like a sprung-loaded thing. And then I think it pulls it, that connects it, and then they pull themselves together. That's what it looked like. But it looked the piece. And the inside of the capsule looked like an airliner. It had the sort of molded cabin walls, and the window looked like an airliner window, and it looked to be quite a bit of space in it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think it can take I think that I'm not entirely sure, but I think it can be fitted out to take 6 or 8. Passengers.
It looked quite roomy,
They can sit one above, they can. It's two levels potentially.
And all the instrumentation on touch screens.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. Anyway, so that was, I reckon that was good to see. And wasn't it sort of kind of ironic that you had all those protests in the street in America and people saying America's going crazy and losing it. And at the same time, you've got this, they're back in the putting people into orbit business, because it was, I think 2011 was the last time they sent anyone up on the shuttle. Man, looking at the shuttle, that was a brutal thing, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. It was. Yeah, no, it was pretty cool, and even so just to add to that, 4 days later they launched another one and put 60 satellites up and brought them both back. You're like, oh my god!
And it landed on the barge out at sea, no problem.
Yeah, no worries.
Though it always seems to blow the camera link, as it's coming in, and it suddenly cuts to it sitting there,
Yeah.
They seem to have that as an ongoing problem. Well, that was really good to see. Just looking at the specs of that AN225. You mentioned, what did you say the length of the A340-600 was?
240 feet or something.
Okay, well, this is 275.59 feet.
Wow.
And the wingspan is 290 feet.
It's nearly, that's 90 odd meters, 80, 90 meters. That's pretty big.
Wing area, 9,741 square feet, and it's 59 feet tall, so it's
there's
big.
Some really good pictures, or not pictures. There's some really good videos on YouTube of they seem to always be going into Leipzig Airport. That's a big DHL freight hub, and there's some really good videos of the AN225 coming into Leipzig, and there's some fantastic cockpit videos of a guy bringing in an Antonov AN-22.
I've seen that.
That's an amazing video, and there's another one of him bringing it into Zurich as well. And it's the same guy, and it is kind of like, oh, I'm swinging onto final approach. Hold my beer and give me a cigarette. I'm taking her in, and
Yeah, yeah. I know, huge control input to keep the thing just straight.
Yeah, and the engineer, the flight engineer's in the middle adjusting the throttles all the time.
Yeah. They're very the flight engineers have quite a bit to do, don't they?
I think
and they've always got those fans. I love those fans that they have.
In one of the videos, I think he tells the flight engineer to put his shirt on.
Yeah. There's a couple of good videos too of the what was that Antonov, just the little high wing turboprop like the F-27.
The 26, the Antonov 26.
Yeah. I mean, people flying them out in somewhere in Congo, Africa, or something, and that's often flying around then back to the compound, but they're taking off on.
I recommend those AN-22 videos. They're brilliant.
Yeah. And I see that the AN-225 also has been operating some flights in and out of Canada for medical charters. Maximum payload 250 metric tons.
Yeah, it's a lot of medical supplies.
1.3 million pounds takeoff weight. The stats are huge. And what do they got? They've got the D18T turbofan, 51,672 pounds of thrust times 6.
There's always talk. Well, there's constant talk of them trying to get investment to build, because they've got another one which is partially built.
I've seen pictures. Yeah,
the hulls are essentially there. And there's every now and again you hear talk of them resurrecting it, and there was talk, and it's probably gone now, of Boeing, because the Boeing and Antonov have had quite a lot to do with each other. And I think the most recent thing I heard would have been about 6 months ago, that they were trying to get Western money to build another 3 or 4, because they think there's demand for about 5 in the world. And they could modernize it, because it's just reflown after an extensive modernization.
Yeah.
But initially, I think they wanted to put new engines on it.
Yeah, you probably only need 4. Imagine 4 G90s on there.
Yeah, but it'd probably upset the engineering of the wing then. But imagine if you put 6 Trent 700s on there.
Oh yeah.
And because they're about the same size. Because the Progress engines, those D18s, they're also I think like Rolls-Royce, they're triple spool engines, so they're quite short and compact.
Yeah, Evchenko, Progress, Lotarev. I think that was the earlier design bureau company, wasn't it? They must have had this new thing merged out of there. But it's quite the aircraft, and it first flew with the Buran this week back in, 1989. So it's been around for quite a while now.
That's why it's got the T-tail. Oh, not the T-tail, the split tail. Yeah,
and the big lumps on the top of the wing box where the Buran sort of joined the aircraft.
Basically, that wing is a new central section with a pylon on it, and then the outer sections are Antonov 124 wings with their pylons on it.
Oh, right. Okay, so the in part of the wing is the addition with an engine on it, and then they've attached the AN 124 wings.
124 wings on the outside of that, yeah.
Right. Well, I guess that lowers, because it's the same fuselage, pretty well, but longer.
Well, longer.
But it's the same. It looks to be the same cross section.
It was a low-cost donkey plane made for the shuttle. It just turns out they could use it for a whole lot of other things.
Yeah, low cost. Yeah. All right, so that's that. I think next week, we want to start our aircraft of the program, and I've nominated the first one, but I think you're going to have to do the research, and that is the was it de Havilland aircraft, the Sea Vixen?
The Sea Vixen. Yeah, I don't need to do any research on the Sea Vixen.
Oh, you know it off by heart.
I pretty much do.
Yeah, so I'm going to dig out some images and maybe a bit of footage, and we'll talk about that aircraft. I used to have a model of it hanging from the ceiling. I used to think it was the hottest looking plane.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, you want to know, unfortunately, or rather sadly, if you want to know anything about Cold War British aircraft, I either will probably know it, or I will be more than enthusiastic to go and find out about it.
You're like the guy I know who's an expert on World War One German battleships.
There you go. Sad, but yeah.
Yeah, where do you find the time?
I think the British were just completely mental. In any country that can come up with the Victor bomber and all that type of thing, it's just like,
watching too many science fiction movies. That's why.
Exactly, straight out of Thunderbirds.
Yeah, totally. Well, you see where Jerry Anderson got his ideas. Though I always used to think his airliners looked more Russian. They had all the pointy fairings like the Tu-154 and those planes. They got really sharp bearings and things like that.
There's a lot of those British planes. I mean, you go up to a Sea Vixen, for example, or you go up to a Sea Vixen or the Javelin, because I've been to all the museums. They're hulking great planes, eh?
Yeah.
I mean,
Buccaneer.
The Buccaneer's massive.
It's big.
Yeah.
They would have been close to F4 size.
Well, the Lightning just looked mental.
Man, I mean, that looked like it was inspired by science fiction.
And it wasn't. It wasn't actually inspired by the availability of two relatively big engines and no money, so they just crammed them in.
Yeah, one on top of each other.
Yeah.
But those wings, they look like the bird wings.
Yeah, they do. Just an amazing aircraft.
So
we'll good, maybe, but amazing.
We'll start. A few of them would have been widow makers, no doubt.
Yeah.
But we'll start covering those and we'll talk about them. But I think we've covered pretty well everything that's going on this week. There's been a few airliners in the sky that I've heard over Auckland, which is a bit of a different noise again from that whole period of time when there was zero. And I did hear the defense minister fly over the other day, but I just couldn't see. It was a bit cloudy. Anyway, so you're in Roma for not the foreseeable future.
I would say another week at least.
Another week? I must say your internet connection's improved today.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
No, definitely.
I wrote a few things down. No, we're pretty good, actually. I think I've got everything that I wanted to say.
Yeah. I haven't seen any other, there's been nothing more said about Virgin Atlantic that I've seen. We still don't know what the vulnerable US carrier is.
Although American Airlines has had a major reorganization this week. They put in...
they fired management, didn't they?
Well, no, they've had a major reshuffle, yeah, and some have gone. But
yeah.
Desperately trying to save money.
Well, I have noticed that in some of the announcements of people being laid off, there has been mention of, there have been quite a few management jobs that have also been drop-kicked, along with the, the lower-end jobs or whatever. So, all right then. So that's our Aviation Podcast for now. Remember, you can support us on Patreon. You've been seeing the web address there all the way through. And from next week, we'll start that feature of aircraft every show. And it'll be the Sea Vixen next week. But in the meantime, it's Paul Brennan here in the bunker, proudly displaying Martin, our flag. Someone told me the other day, they said, "What's the Australian flag doing behind you?" I said, "Crikey, it's the New Zealand flag."
Steady.
Oh,
yeah. And New Zealand had that flag before Australia. So
well, there you go. So maybe there is confusion between the two.
Australia chose their design to keep it similar to the New Zealand flag because at that stage they were still talking about a union of the two countries,
becoming part of the federation.
You read the history about that; it's actually quite interesting. And one of the biggest opponents of Confederation was the Prime Minister at the time. I forget his name. He's got that big memorial on the end of the point, because he owned a customs and he owned a customs brokerage, and he was making.
Okay, we want that. We want to interfere with the business.
Yes. Anyway.
All right. So in the meantime, it's goodbye from me and
goodbye from me. See you later.